Okay, so today we're gonna go over um, some information here about truth in plain sight. I'm warming up now, so I'm going here and do invite. Let's see how this. What's up with you, big dog? See you in there watching. You know we about to go into this truth in plain sight and decode this Hollywood and the life rules that's been kept from us. That's what we about to go into. Um, you got me, Phil? So I'm gonna give us a minute for a couple more people to get on here, and then I'm gonna start going into um, the information because the rule. I'm gonna go with the rule first, so that y'all understand why they tell you in pop culture what's going on according to the times and the agenda. So the rule is this: anything they do to undermine your will, your right of choice, they have to tell you or give you the opportunity to discover the deception. So anything they do to you, they have to give you a means of discovering what they are doing to you. Now, they can tell you in a news report as a news story what they doing to you. They can tell you in a book. They can tell you in a movie. Any format that the truth is revealed in, as long as the opportunity of you connecting the dots is available, then they are following the rules. So that's going to keep them in power if you don't know the rule. And so what we have here with the X-Men. Now, everybody is familiar with a Malcolm X interview with Louis Lomax called "The Hate That Hate Made." Um, Nobody had never heard of the Nation of Islam on a national front before the Hate That Hate Made in 1958 with Louis Lomax. From then, the Nation of Islam exploded. And the big thing about the name, if you go back and look at the footage of Malcolm X, you'll hear him defending his usage of the X, right? So now the mainstream is aware of these men of the X, Malcolm X and these other X's. They call them X-Men. Now, while right on the heels of this, a couple years later, a comic book series emerged, and the comic book series is about X-Men. The X-Men are mutants with something wrong with a strain in their DNA that allow them to harness extra human powers. Now, the X-Men is a direct correlation to the doctrine of the Nation of Islam. The X-Men is about Elijah Muhammad and Masonry in the application of this in waking up or and teaching people to control their mutant DNA, or what they would call in the African culture, they call it the God strain or the light strain. So if you can't control it, it's gonna destroy you. So the X-Men drew directly from the Nation of Islam idea of man as God. Now, if you examine the powers of some of the X-Men and you parallel it to the psychic phenomenon that people claim to experience, you'll find that in the animations and in the comic books, they are the same power, but the power is exaggerated in the cartoon or the animation. Example, Rogue. Rogue is Cajun. She's French. The name Rogue is actually Rouge, which is red, in reference to what they call the blood. And what is her power? If she touches anything, she absorbs their powers and she's able to use them. That's a form of vampirism in the psychic realms. So you study it as vampirism, you understand that rogue power is an exaggerated expression of vampirism, or energy vampirism to be more specific. So she is an energy vampire that can use the energy of somebody else. They find in paranormal research that there are people called empaths. And the level of empath determine how much of somebody else's characteristics or traits they can take on. So this is Rogue in the X-Men and her powers. Who else do you have with a power? You have Gambit, the gambler. What he does is called enchantment of an item. It's an enchantment. So what Gambit is doing with the deck of cards is he's charging the card with something called chi energy that's programmed to react in a certain way when it hit another force. So your chi energy is basically accumulated mind. The mind, the way you thinking, is accumulated into like a ball of energy that you can utilize. It's called chi, and that's what Tai Chi in Asia is all about, controlling that chi energy and developing it. So Gambit charges it. So all of these psychic phenomenon come from being from realizing the God gene or the God light strain within you. Then you have in the laboratory, you have this guy they call the Beast. The Beast is a blue dude that kind of look like an ape. If you know your Kemetic history, you would know him to be the baboon that they call Thoth or Jehuti. And that Professor X would be none other than Imhotep himself. So Imhotep, being educated by the master of masters, is right there. But in modern times, there's parallel Professor X with Elijah Muhammad as being the creator of the X-Men or the awakener of the God strain or the light strain. Now, what do I mean by Elijah Muhammad being the awakener of the God strain or the light strain? Now, if you look at Malcolm X in that fiery oratory, at the same time you had Martin Luther King with a fiery oratory. And they had two different philosophical viewpoints, but they all had the same agenda in the recovery from the oppression, right? Malcolm had a different view of passion when he looked at the problem and the situation, because he was seeing it with spiritual eyes as a warfare. So he looked at it as like a general, a warfare. So the method that Martin was using, he couldn't see it as a functional method to fight a war. But what Martin was doing was not trying to fight a war. What Martin was doing was trying to establish a relief and a peace. Excuse me 1 second. I'm supposed to be getting on this other. All right, got you. All right, so what Elijah Muhammad was doing was teaching Malcolm in a way that allowed Malcolm's light strain to be under control so as not to cause sheer destruction. And he did that with a method of discipline. So if you ever hear anybody talk about the Nation of Islam, one of the things that they always talk about in the fruit is that level of discipline. Because that level of discipline that they are teaching is it got several benefits in the physical world, but from the spiritual standpoint, they need that level of discipline to control the light strain as it turns on so as they don't become a menace and a terror within the environment that they are trying to stabilize. So Professor X being the one teaching the mutants how to control the light strain as it turns on. Now, if you watch the storyline of the X-Men, you'll see that they're in Washington lobbying to exterminate the mutants. This is called, in the real life, this is Rex 84 that was Readiness Exercise 1984 that was drew up by Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North. So this same thing was being lobbied some 25 years later in real life that parallels what took place in the animation series. So they wanted to wipe out the mutants. So if they wanted to wipe out the mutants and they passed the law, what do the mutants respond? The mutants is capable of destroying everybody in the X-Men. But what Professor X is trying to teach is that even though you have all this power, you're so powerful you can destroy a regular person, that's not just. So they taking this back to Egypt once again with the law of Mach, because no injustice can stand in the universe. So all of these characters are in the X-Men is actually exaggerated natural psychic abilities that we have. And these exaggerated psychic abilities make for good entertainment. But if you turn the volume down on them or take the exaggeration aspect out and you pick up a book on psychic abilities, you will be able to match up the exact psychic ability that they talk about as a mutant strain in the DNA. You'll be able to match it up. Like, for instance, Magneto. What is his ability? Magnetism. What is magnetism in the realm of psychic? It's massive charisma. It's the ability to draw others in. Well, they use his in reference to the actual metal. That's the exaggeration. But it's not really an exaggeration because a magnetic quality in the person appeals to the metals in the person that they attract. So in essence, it's an accuracy, but it's an exaggerated accuracy for the entertainment value, and so that you don't really know that they're telling you a truth in plain sight while you are being entertained and you're not taking them serious. They've gave you the opportunity to discover this truth, and you the one who decided whether you would or would not acknowledge it as they showed it to you. So in moving from the X-Men, you find the movie Panther. Now Panther is a very unique character because he's one of the so-called first black superheroes, which is absolutely not the case, because the very first superhero on record, being Heru or Horus, the son, the sole son of the mother, that resurrected and redeemed his father's throne. So that was the first black superhero in truth. But now, as we go into the movie Panther, we need to know the symbolism. What is the symbolism of the panther? Okay, in ancient times, priests wore leopard skins. Black leopard skins was reserved for a very, very specific group of political priests. And they were actually part of a royal court. And they were the practitioners of certain rights within the priesthood in order to maintain the balance. And that's what the black was over the spots. If you look at a panther, it's either a black leopard or a black jaguar or whatever the case may be. You can see the black spots if you really look at them. But the leopard also represents in Egypt the goddess Bast. So when you have to examine her qualities, and you will see that she was also represented in the movie Panther when it very first come on. There was no coincidence who they got to play the mother, because in real life, her name, we call her Angela Bassett. And if you translate the Greek to the English, her name is Angel of Bast. And she played the mother of the Panther, the prince. So they're going back to the Black Madonna and Child once again with the movie Panther. Now, this is very significant to modern pop culture, because in modern pop culture, we have the legacy of Tupac Amaru Shakur as the son of Afeni Shakur, the Black Panther. And that's why, if you notice when it come on, it starts in Oakland. Now, in Oakland is where Tupac's rap career really developed after he left Baltimore School of the Arts. So the movie was like a precursor or a predictor of how the events in the final age is supposed to unfold. So you take a look at the movie Panther. When it first come on, you see a alien ship, but the ship is not truly alien. It's African and it's cloaked and it's from Earth. So there is a clue right there to something. So we have to go search our history. We have to search our Native American history, our African history, our Asian history to find out if this movie has any validity in the storyline. In the storyline, if you pay attention, you'll see that this dude, that there's the prince, the crown prince, is fighting to maintain the control of his nation without the world invading their privacy and trying to steal their wealth, resources, and their technology. So he's trying to protect it from that. But now you have his cousin who grew up outside of that, and he really have no sense of understanding of what it's like on the inside of trying to protect these secrets and these rights. So he just want to just set this off. He want to just tear it up, kill all of the enemy, never knowing that there's something else in play here. And so these two become emissaries. This is Tupac and Biggie all day long, according to the storyline in pop culture that they're repeating. This Tupac and Biggie. Now watch what happened. So he get attempted assassination. They thought he was dead. But while he was recovering, he is basically resurrected by the chief of a guerrilla clan. Why the guerrilla clan? Now, if you go back to ancient Egypt, you know your Egyptian studies, there's only one totem animal that has not been produced in the hieroglyph, and that is the gorilla. The reason being is because the last totem to rule would be the gorilla, or the monkey king, or the king of the Congo, because the true Holy Land is not in the Middle East, so don't fall for that. Those imposters over there are not Jews. That's not the Holy Land. So go back to the movie, look at how they set the map of Africa up, because there's no country in Africa called Wakanda, but the geographical landmass they speak of you can match up the area to the Congo. And the guerrilla chief telling them, I got the right to the throne. I can, but he don't really want to contend because he think that my man, the Panther, can do this without bringing the world to ruin, basically. So he's like, I don't want to get in it. He let his mother heal him up, get him back in the fight, get him back in the game. Boom, he reclaimed the kingdom. At the end of the movie, you find him where? Back in Oakland, talking about the recovery. Now, when we talk about the recovery that he's going over and how he's going to teach the people the truth and all of this stuff and build the museums, the recovery is the exposure of the times, the history, and how this all is weaved together. Now remember, they have to give you the opportunity to discover the manner in which the deception is taking place. But they do not have to tell it to you outright, directly or factually. They can veil it in children's art form and make you believe that it's only entertainment. But you've been exposed to the storyline already. So you're supposed to be perceptive enough to see it. Once they gave you the opportunity to discover, if you do not discover, that absolves them. So then they can do another blood ritual and rite to capture what you use as an ignorance. They can capture it and use it as you giving consent to them to use your power to keep you oppressed. You are consenting to them by not acknowledging the truth that's in plain sight, that they can control you. Did I say, okay, you can control me because I'm not smart enough to see what's before me. But it's not that you're not smart enough. They use trickery. They use trickery and deception. So in the movie Panther, you see the whole story play out of Tupac, his beef with Biggie. That's the same story. We don't even match the storyline up and realize it's the same exact story because we don't pay attention to the subtleties. The distractions is more what we pay attention to, the explosions, the costumes, but we don't pay attention to the content or the context of the storyline, which goes to the Planet of the Apes. Because in the Planet of the Apes, you got the same story. You got Koba and you got Caesar at conflict. But both of them is for their people, but they got two different agendas. This is Malcolm and Martin Luther King all day long. Both of them end up getting killed. But they're telling you a double story with Planet of the Apes. Actually, it's multiple stories in the Planet of the Apes. Because the Planet of the Apes is representative of the Rh positive blood factor. The undermining forces which came was Rh negative reptilian bloodline, whereas the evolved human, was Rh positive mammalian bloodline. Now, when you talk about the Planet of the Apes, you're talking about the returning to Earth to its natural owners, the Rh positive. Now, the Rh negative bloodlines influence the genetics without the permission from the creator, which caused a whole lot of problems, which I'm not going to get into here. I want to stay on the Planet of the Apes in the story that's being told in it. It's the Moses story, if you really pay attention. At the end is where, after the final one, is when he's sitting up there and shot, is where you realize it's the Moses story. So you go back to the beginning of the Planet of the Apes, and it gives you the unfolding of the beginning of the Christ story of the New Testament, but it ends with the telling of the Moses story. And they did that because it's the same story, but it was changed subtly so as to confuse us as to how the actual story went. If they don't tell you the story in sequential order, it's up to you to figure out the sequence. So they can tell it to you out of order in order to confuse you, but it's up to you, and it takes a lot of time and research and trying to be accurate with your research to be able to put the pieces together. So, Caesar started out as just a regular evolved chimp, and he had something in his blood that was given to his mother. This is your Eve story. And Eve was supposed to be infused with the light strain by the serpent. And the light strain was able to give her seed the life strain, which was the access to eternal life. So the light strain is the knowledge, the light strain. Then the life strain is the evolved wisdom of ascension. That's the tree of life. So you got the tree of knowledge, which is the light strain, which is the DNA being encoded with packets of light that carry binary code that tells you when to wake up from a slumber where you had to learn life lessons, and then you evolve back into your angelic form. So this is all encoded in the DNA. So when you see them giving Caesar's mother the injection, it's affecting the baby that's in her, that she's carrying, and when she protects her child, it kills her. That's supposed to be the story of the Christ, because the Christ is not a man. The Christ is a woman, and the son of man was her son, as you see with the Black Madonna and child. So when we get that story straightened out, all of the rest of them lines up. And so they couldn't kill the Christ if they wanted to. But that goes on to a whole other subject matter. I want to stay with the Planet of the Apes. In the story of the Planet of the Apes, it is the Nazca lines, the movie King Kong, and the repeated telling of the Planet of the Apes, the origin of the story, and the major symbols and names that connect it all. To go into the origin of the Planet of the Apes story, it was written in pulp fiction form as a novel, and it came out of Paris, France. It's the significance to that, and I'm going to touch a little bit, but I'm not going to go too deep into that because that's a whole nother thing. That's the bloodline of the Holy Grail. So the book came from France, the same as the Statue of Liberty came from France. You got to remember that, because later on in another video, we're going to clear all up to the why factor of that. So the book was written in France by a Frenchman. In several interviews, he said this book, this story, The Planet of the Apes, is when about the black people take charge of Earth or reclaim Earth. And he said this is the day of the dread of the white people. He was a Frenchman that wrote the book. And so they was going back to the United States Constitution, the 3/5 Compromise. They was going to the biblical Exodus reference and the story of Moses. They was going to the story of the Christ. Now, you got to remember, the Jews are waiting on Moses. The Jews are waiting on Moses. They're waiting on the Son of Man. They've never been waiting on the Christ because they fear her. They only want the Son. They wanted the Son of Man, or they thought they did. But the Son will never betray the mother, as has been proven time and time again. The Son will never betray the mother, as has been proven time and time again. So this is where your Black Madonna is. So this is when they took Caesar, the son, from the mother. Now, Caesar is being raised as a human, but he's an ape. This is a reverse storytelling of a different story. Caesar's being raised as a human, but he's an ape. But he got the light strain which can evolve into the life strain within him. So as Caesar grows up, he feel like he wanted a family to the people he's living with. He protects that old man, and it gets him into some trouble, because in pack animals, especially the primates, when the family is under attack, there is no limit where the soldiers of the clan, which is of the other rankings, will go in order to protect the pack. This is basic pack behavior, and humans are pack animals. So when he get in trouble, they lock him up. When they lock him up, it's only one in there, the orangutan, that understands Caesar well enough to talk to him. The orangutan is representative of the Asian connection to the African. The Asian connection to the African develops with the legend of Sun Wukong. And Sun Wukong, in his celestial backflip, being told by the Buddha, and the Buddha naming him Hanuman, being the highest evolution of perfected man, being one with the Creator. In other words, fully realized. So when the Frenchman wrote the book, he was reflecting the 3/5 compromise and the Dred Scott ruling. Because if you can only tax them 3/5, you have to know the origin of taxation. Then you have to know how does it apply and what does it mean. So if they can only tax you 3/5, the only thing in the history of Earth that you were never allowed to tax was God. So by the default, the unrealized 2/5, the light strain and the life strain being dormant, surrenders the jurisdiction to the subject matter because the light strain and the life strain is dormant. Those parts cannot be taxed. But when you get into the three-dimensional fixed position reality, they talking about the physical body, they talking about the emotional body, and they talking about the mental body, because you have the other 2/5 unrealized. Now, when you 2/5 awaken, these 2/5 claim first jurisdiction and first right of the 3/5, because the 3/5 is the mobile animating construct in which it navigates this reality. So this is what they put in Caesar, the light strain, life strain, the 2/5 that became realized when he was in prison. So what did Caesar come up with after consulting with the orangutan is that he needed to find a way to turn on the light strain, life strain in the rest of the apes, because they don't understand right now that they even in prison. So Caesar dip out in the middle of the night, go to the place where they kept the vials of the light strain, life strain, come back, flood the room with it, you know what I'm saying, and turn on the light strain, life strain of all of the rest of the apes. Now they are starting to form organized mass moving units. They are forming, this is, now we at Ezekiel in Old Testament, this is the raising of the dry bones. And that's what the fumes represented when it said Ezekiel speak to the winds. The fumes that came from the canisters was Caesar's way of telling his brethren to awaken from their slumber. So the Planet of the Apes is probably one of the most significant movies, especially this last one that came out, as to the rise of the Rh positive bloodlines and the reclaiming of the throne of Earth. They already understand that this is a done deal and it's over. We just have to unify to tell them we know it too. So if I give y'all the information, then y'all can run with it. Okay, so now, the light strain, life strain being fully realized, now you 5/5, The only person got jurisdiction over you is the Christ, because the Christ is the only true judge. The Christ is the only true judge. Nobody else can have jurisdiction of the person, because they can maintain the jurisdiction of the subject matter because it's all within their system. Let them have that. But because of the realized, the 2/5 that's realized, the light strain, the life strain, because they become realized, they become first claim of right to the other 3/5. So as holding the first claim of right, nobody can judge you any longer but the Christ, because the Christ is the one who controls the light strain, life strain. So in the Planet of the Apes, as they move through the various phases of the prophecy, you wind up at the end with Caesar after the final battle and causing the destruction of the enemy and escaping with a bullet wound, or I think it was maybe an arrow wound. And he's sitting up there. That is Moses on the mountaintop. It's telling you in plain sight what it is. If you read the story of Moses, when he gets to the mountaintop, he's allowed to look out over the promised land. What Malcolm say, I've been to the mountaintop. I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you. He said it. So, the promised land that Caesar looked out over, he passed away before the rest of the clan went into the promised land. He watched out over them as they all went into the promised. It's the same story in Moses in the Bible. It's the exact same story. It's no different. So they tell you these things in pop culture to weave various different prophecies, signs, and events into a format in which you could possibly discover the secret if you knew what you were looking at. But because you only accept it as for entertainment value, then there's no way that you can utilize it to its maximum benefit of seeing and unraveling the information. So that's why you have people that go on YouTube and they do decoding videos to try to help others at the awakening point unravel the mystery before us, because it's all obvious in plain sight, and they use misdirection so we don't see it. It's the same as David Copperfield making the elephant disappear. We know he didn't make the elephant disappear, but he made it look like he made the elephant disappear. But he didn't make the elephant disappear. The elephant didn't go nowhere. He just made it look like it went somewhere. Misdirection. If you don't pay attention, the misdirection will make you think you're looking at the actual thing. But you're not looking at the actual thing. You're falling for the misdirection. And when you look at these movies, our inner child become wrapped up in an entertainment value. And our scholar goes to sleep because the child is dancing, having fun. But don't stop the child from dancing and having fun. Just don't let the scholar go to sleep. Because you're not supposed to overindulge in analysis of things, but you're not supposed to ignore what's in plain sight either. When you start seeing all of the stuff that they automatically tell you, why do you think they put money magic on the dollar bill? Because you have to know that there's money magic on the dollar bill. Why? Because you have the right to discover the deception. Any deception they pull, they have to expose you to it in order for you to have the opportunity to break the code. So, in the X-Men, in Panther, in the Planet of the Apes, they weave the same tapestry together as they did with Thanos. Thanos is the same force in the X-Men that they call Apocalypse. The same thing. Kronos, coming to eat his own babies. The only thing that you can't escape is time in a 3D fixed position reality. That's Kronos eating his own babies. but he's really not eating his babies. His babies is not able to outstretch the wrath of Chronos as the stretching of time, because time is drawn out in a linear fashion, and it's difficult for a um, person that has abstract vision to navigate linear vision. But it's the same way for a person with linear vision to navigate abstract spiritual vision. So they use these to their advantage to confuse our mind. Because once they get us confused, that's when the misdirection works best. Because it becomes a suggestibility issue at that point, as any hypnotist can tell you. So in all these movies, they tell you in plain sight about the Messiah myth. They tell you about the resurrection. They tell you about the Exodus. They tell you about the return of the Christ. They tell you about Moses reaching the promised land. They're telling you all of them again, but they got subtleties there. And then they got what they call streamers that pop up in the middle of nowhere. Like the story of Wonder Woman, being that she is the God killer. Only a God can kill a God. And she the only one on earth. And she a woman. This is not matching with something. That means God must be a woman. God must be a woman, because if God was a man and you needed a God to kill a God, then you would need a man God to kill him. Because only a man God can kill a man God. Or a God can kill a God. They didn't say a goddess. They said a God. So they're giving you a subtle confession there in Wonder Woman. If you really look at the story of what they tell you in Wonder Woman, they lay it all out. Adolf Hitler being Ares, the god of war, the wrath of Earth. Ares was defending Earth from foreign invaders. Okay. They telling you the story. But Diana, who is Diana? Follow her history. She was a Greek goddess, you know. And Diana was just another representative of Isis. But she was Greek. The Greek pantheon was written by Egyptian priests. So when you look at Wonder Woman, you're not even realizing that you're really talking about the Christ. Because the Christ is a woman. And it's provable with the Bible if everybody just look at the truth that's in plain sight. But I'm not going to get into that because we're on pop culture. Also in pop culture, you have like Superman. This is the greatest farce. Who is Superman? Kal-El. Now watch what they did. Kal-El is El-Kali, a woman. That's why they had to give you Supergirl. El-Kali is Kali from the Indus Valley that they call the Dark Mother. And she is supposed to be the Christ because she's known in Egypt as Isis, which translates in English as Jesus, basically, for if you look at it for what it is. Okay, so they telling you in all of the pop culture the secret, but because it's in plain sight, you can't see it because of the misdirection and the entertainment value. We get so caught up in being entertainment and keeping up with the Joneses that even when they tell you something obvious, you miss it. You miss it. So, who else do we talk about in the Amazonians that she dwelled among, her mother being one of them. Now, her mother is not a god killer. The Amazonians in ancient times were the Gorgons. The Gorgons. Now, notice they call them Amazonians, and they lived on the riverbank. The Amazon is in South America, but the story comes from Greece in Central Europe. Now, pay attention to that. The Amazon River is in South America. The Amazon story comes from Greece and Central Europe. Now, Columbus didn't even exist when the Amazon story was written. But remember, you got to change the names to protect the guilty. You got to change the name to protect the guilty. The Amazonians were the Gorgons. And the Gorgons were the women guardians of Earth. And Medusa was one of them. Medusa was punished because she got raped and turned into a hideous monster, so to speak. That's the story. And one of the Titans, or one of the sun demigods, chopped her head off and all that. That's not true. But that's a myth. But it's a telling of a story to get a point across. Because the power that the woman had, when people first started seeing rosters with dreadlocks, the subconscious memory of the Gorgons shook fear in the marrow of the first so many people that seen it. And this is why. The Gorgons were warrior queens, and they were also called the Sibyls. And they had factions that protected Earth all over Earth before the invaders came. This is your story of the Amazonian warrior princesses. In real life, if you want to know real stories of them, they still exist. These warrior women are still here. They're with us. They walk with us every day. We see them carrying the weight of the world on their shoulder with a smile, never knowing that they are an undercover warrior of God. So when they seen these dreadlocks, what they call the Nazarene rite, they thought the Gorgon had returned and awakened. So that's why they automatically call Rastas the natty dread, or that dreaded lock. They dreaded that the Gorgons, which is all women, by the way, there are no men that were Gorgons. And they reproduced through parthenogenesis. And they were guardians of Earth. That was their job. Now, when the invaders came, they put the Earth into a coma. And they done it by flipping the grid from an electron-proton-electron grid, which was feminine in construct, into a proton-electron-proton grid, which is masculine in construct. Now, how did the prophecies know at this time it would be a rampant amount of what they call homosexuality? It has nothing to do with anything being wrong with a person. It goes with an energy and a weakening of a contract right called the gender contract in hermetics. When you get to the end of the age, all of the laws become subject to be re-examined, including the law of gender. So when they examine the contracts, all of the things that take place are things that take place. And people want to put judgments on it. You can't put a judgment on it because it's the thing that's taking place is taking place. By putting a judgment on it is not going to help or support it. It's only going to make it into a negative. What you want to do is find the healthy, happiest, and the best outcome for all people involved. If you don't put a condemnation on it, you don't hold a negative vibration to it, when we make the shift, everything will correct itself. But if we keep the negative low vibrations and we go to make the shift, people are going to turn into dust, literally, as the story of Lot's wife, because they stuck in the old energy, which is symbolically looking back. You can't stay stuck in that negative hate energy. You can't stay stuck in that he white and she black energy. That's the old energy. That was all done for the cleansing process of earth. All that negative energy got to go now. It got to go. And when that negative energy is gone, we're going to all have heaven on earth. But first, we have to find the unified front in order to oust that negative energy in unison. Basically, we have to flip the grid back to the feminine grid and restore the natural manner in which humans live, which was a matriarchal people. And they don't mean that your man is a lesser configuration of the family. It's just that it's a different setup. It's a different setup under matriarchy than patriarchy. It doesn't take any power from men. Actually, it makes the matriarchal system makes a powerful man hundreds of times more powerful because it's relying on him having to influence strong-willed, clear-thinking women that his interests in the recovery of the rights of the people are so right and correct, he can't fool that many women. He can bullshit men. He can convince a lot of women in different ways of different things, but when it comes to saving these babies, he cannot convince a collective of women, if he is not about the right thing, that he's going to do anything to save these babies, and she put him in power. If he get in power and he slip through the cracks, the collective of women, if they turn their back on him, he's just going to fall. That's why they've been telling us all this time behind every great man is a great woman. She pulling the fucking strings. So it boils down to the energy matrix. And then this is what they're telling you by the Amazonians. When the Gorgons were overthrown, which is an overthrow of the matriarchal system and the establishment of a male patriarchal system that was not conducive to women having any role of prominence. When the Romans got married, they had to dress their newly married women up like a little boy, or else they couldn't have a sex act with her. Now, in this modern time, we should ask ourselves, how is she supposed to feel as a female and a woman, right? That in order for her husband she just married to be aroused, she got to look like a boy. That don't make no sense. In order for her husband, how is she supposed to feel? A woman is an emotional creature. They need to be emotionally nourished. How is she supposed to feel if she had to look like a boy in order to get her husband attention? Something is broke. Look at the artwork in Rome. You hardly see anything that promotes anything woman or feminine. Because what happened was this. The story is about Helen. And this is where your hell come from. And this is about the Gorgons and the falling of the goddess and the overthrow of the patriarchy. It's all tied into this. And this is how it goes. Go back to Greece. Helen is a woman. Go back to Greece. Helen is a woman. Helen in Greece developed, or Helen's influence in Greece, I should say, developed all of the Greek philosophers, all of the Greek scientists, healers, all that developed under the influence of Helen. Now they call it Hellenistic. Now, watch what happened. Rome took Helen, kidnapped her. And this is where they talk about Medusa had her head chopped off. He kidnapped her. When they kidnapped her, they replaced her with a man dressed in drag, and they called him Helen. Right? Now, when you look at the Greek pantheon and you get to Helen, Helen is all of a sudden male. This is how we got in hell, because this is Hellenism. When they undermined that woman like that, what they did was they injected into um, the process of the growth of humans what they call a reptilian trait. It's a book called The Selfish Gene. I don't got to tell you nothing else. The book you need to read to understand when the patriarch took over, they activated the selfish gene. It's a whole book about it. You can study it all you want. The selfish gene. Because that's the reptilian part of the human animal. But the human is more mammalian as higher evolved. That's why the smallest part of your brain in the stem is called your reptilian brain. Your reptilian brain is the one that's selfish, and it requires a low vibration, and it makes you operate off animal instinct. That's your reptilian brain. When you get to your cerebral cortex, your major mammalian brain, your second mammalian and big mammalian brain, you are talking about your RH brain. Now, this part of the brain is not fully realized because of the barrier. I'm not allowed to discuss the barrier right now. But this part of the brain is not fully realized because once it becomes fully realized, this activates the other 2/5 to make the 3/5 become the 5/5 realized, having first claim the right and jurisdiction of soul and body. Because the body is just a vessel created for the soul to animate the 3D reality. So once that happens, then we all become in control of the self. But the hell in Hellenism, Georgetown University History of the World has a little section there that describes how it worked. Hellenism. Pay attention. You pick your leader. You ride and die with your leader to the end. But they need control and influence in your sector. But your leader is a barrier to their control. Hell is short for Hellenism, so pay attention. Under Hellenism, they find a person that'll sell you for a price. And then they promote him. They put him at odds against the leader that you actually pick. Then they neutralize him. Take him out of power and authority. They neutralize him is the term they use. They don't say execute because they may not execute him. They may just charge him with a whole bunch of sex crimes, use him as a public spectacle to cover up a political agenda that's taking place in the background. Or they may call him a molester because they're scared that he might be the Christ. And when they can't convict him of sex crimes against children, they might just go on and pay a doctor to execute him because he just might be the Christ. If you knew the history and paid attention, you'd know. Okay, now, they know the real Christ, they can't do nothing to, so the only way they can kill him, he was a fake. But he never claimed to be. So, when you look at pop culture and you watch the news and you see all of your president jumping around like Donald Duck and being a buffoon, the man is very intelligent. That's called, in debate, a red herring, meaning that it's a tool of distraction used to bring your attention. The same thing, misdirection. David Copperfield. While he doing all this, hey, I'm stupid president, read the ticker. Because they probably going to be telling you something to the effect of they planning a war with this country or that country, or they indicted this person or that person, or they might not even put it in the regular news. They might put it in some what they call tabloid format, so that while he's making a silly of himself, it's been exposed to you and you had the right to discover it and it got right past you. So they'll put it in a YouTube video and tell you flat, this is what's going on right now in front of your face and you don't even see it. And then they'll have what they call a misdirection. Will be somebody that'll discredit the truth that you was just told. A dude will take a 10-minute video and rip it apart for an hour. A 10-minute video and rip it apart for an hour so that you will know that the truth you just seen was not the truth you just seen, but the misdirection he's about to show you. So the Gorgons being guaranteed to reawaken. This is what the story is about in the Necronomicon. The Necronomicon becomes dangerous and volatile as a grimoire because some of the names have been altered. And if you call forth something by the wrong name, and it's very powerful, and you piss it off, you can really do some damage to yourself. So, but a lot of the stuff in the Necronomicon is based off actual facts. It's based off actual fact. Actually, the Prophet Muhammad is actually the wandering Arab, and the story comes through the Sufi schools that actually fell into the public domain, the Necronomicon, and it was never supposed to be disseminated. The same as the Bible. None of those religious texts were supposed to be like books for everyday people to read. But because we all have to eventually have every means to discover the deception and to see what's hidden in plain sight, because we're supposed to have every means to discover it, they start to put these secret things out. But what they do before they put them out is they tweak them. They adjust it to paint the paradigm so that you don't pay the theme any importance. You get hooked on the character, or you get hooked on the writing style or the poetic format, which is why Muhammad was told not to rely on the poetry. These are all distractions from the underlying truth in plain sight. Everything they doing to us, they telling us with the Babylonian money magic, with the symbols on the dollars. They telling us they're capturing our energy and our money. And they're also showing it to us every day. They're broadcasting to us that they're taking organs from our children because they're telling us in the news stories. You can pull up a news story, your kids, especially kids that's black, being found with no organs. They don't got no organs. They take all their organs. You finding them shot in the head and everything missing, or they shot somewhere else and their brain gone. You finding that babies are coming up missing and ain't nobody even looking for them. I ain't gonna look for them. They just ate him. Why look for them? They ate him. You can't go find him. They ate him. They eating babies. So, and they use these things as tools to oppress us. So if they use these as tools to oppress us, once we become, just the fact that you know something, you can't unknow it. Once you know it, you can't unknow it. Once you got it figured out a little bit, your brain gonna autopilot to unravel the rest of that particular puzzle. Because your brain is designed to help you navigate. If you start to peel the veil back a little bit, it'll rip the cover off. Your brain designed to do that. So that's why they use all of these cultural influences to drive us away from our intellectual ability. And your brain works like a computer. It works like this. When you studying and going to school, you got 60 gigabytes of information that your brain will hold. Just 60. Now, some people are what you call a genius. But they only got 60 gigabytes. What happened? Your brain will filter the gigabytes as they come in. You will store the information. according to the level of accuracy. When your brain determines that it's not accurate, it's going to kick it out. When you feel that 60 gigabytes of memory storage, something happens. And this is when you tap into a higher stream of information that's accessible. They call it Akashic Records. That 60 gigabytes has to find another means or source of data storage, retention, and resolution. So it taps into what they call the subconscious mind. Everybody is connected at that level. It's also called the supermind, the oversoul, all that. It's the same thing. But if you fill your data bank up with reliable information real fast, you classify it as a genius because you are in that stream. You are able to filter in information that other people don't have access to and gives you a higher ability of problem solving. And like I said in another once before, when you teach a child, you take the governor off his brain if you don't tell him what to think, but in other words, you give him the tools as to how to think. That takes the governor off his brain, you know. So at that point, the child he can fill that 60 gigabytes up before he's 7 and tap dance around a genius that's 70 with no problem. Because he don't have the restrictions that the life put on that 70-year-old, he can only download the pure wisdom. And from that aspect, they call that child a genius. That means he 5/5 realized. When they call a child a genius or a savant, that means they 5/5 realized. But the savant, because he is realized, it comes out kind of quirky. The difference in the genius and the savant is Kanye West and Jay-Z. Jay-Z a genius. Kanye West a savant. Jay-Z a genius. Kanye West a savant. Now watch the difference. Kanye go on there, Jay-Z go on the interview and he don't say no outlandish stuff. He don't come in there with no oddball or out of the ordinary type clothing. And he have a coherent conversation and he don't say nothing that arouse like people to say, is he crazy? Check his sanity, right? The savant being Kanye. Kanye come into an interview, you don't know what to expect. That's savant. He don't do it out of ignorance because he's not ignorant. His artistic talent is so much stronger than his intellectual capacity that it causes his expression to be what you call an abstract expression. Whereas the genius like Jay-Z, his artistic ability and his intellectual prowess is probably close to even. So he'll come off as a more balanced person. But in real life, it could be the absolute opposite. But he'll come across as the more balanced because the abstract part is not visible. When Kanye, as a savant, make his abstract self visible, the regular people that's closer to what we call a normal see him as like some form of insanity or a lunacy. But really, when you analyze what he's saying from an abstract angle, you get to see what Kanye's saying a little clearer when you filter that back through your intellectual understanding, because you have to see how he see it. And that's where we all drop the ball because we don't all know this. And they keep our communication skills limited because they don't want us to unify. Go back to the Tower of Babel. They keep our communications limited. So we don't know all of the ways that we communicate, so we can never communicate effectively. So Kanye had a controversial statement that the slavery was more like a choice because it was for 400 years. He was bringing attention to something. Anybody that want to know what Kanye really talking about, tune in on YouTube to Dane Calloway. Dane Calloway understands, but he ain't got to the place where he's gonna tell you. He got to bring you along at a pace that he don't shock your consciousness to the fact that there was never a slavery in America, and that what you thought was slavery was a war, and that King George won the war that they called the American Revolution, which was an attempt of the other war that was going on in the Afar Inca that they call Africa, and they was bringing the POWs over here, the same as Gitmo. They got parallels because the parallels, remember, this is about the truth in plain sight. Watch this. The 13 colonies were Gitmos. Go back to the history books, and who did they tell you they sent over here? They dumped their prisons here. Now, most of the pilgrims died. 13 colonies. Why did they pick 13 colonies? Pay attention. 13 colonies. Now, y'all need to go do some research on the number 13 and what it means. It's not a bad luck number like they've been telling you. Go back to Egypt with it. Now, the war that they fought on the other side of the water when they brought their POWs over here and told them they were slaves. They brought the POWs over here. No, they told us they were slaves. Now, these were people of African descent in truth. But we was all one people, but we were one people from different clans on different sides of the water. We communicated with each other, as in the story of Mansa Musa and the spirit rulership. Investigate that and you'll know we was one people, because Mansa Musa ruled out the remaining portion of his life from this side of the ocean. So y'all have to know y'all history. If he ruled out his remaining portion and he left the province over on the other side of the ocean, his brother ruled that out for the remainder of his life. And they found the spirit rulership to be in the hands of somebody here in the island that they now call Cuba. Cuba was one of the first so-called plantations. Now you hear a lot of the native activists that look like us say that that they not Africans, they ain't never been slaves, and they don't know what they talking about. They correct. The African slave and the POW is what they talking about. The POW, because it was the war was being fought on both sides of the ocean. Here, they write it down where the stronghold was as the Seminole Wars in Florida. When you go to the Seminole Wars, all this is in plain sight, and they celebrate it even with the football teams, the Florida Seminoles. They telling you the story subtly. It's all in plain sight. None of it is a secret if you follow the crumbs. All right, so now the Seminole Wars last for hundreds of years. America signed treaties, right, with the Iroquois Nation to settle the land. When they do this, the people that's of African descent are enslaved in what is the Middle Passage. Now you hear people say there was no ships of millions and millions of black people brought to America. They are actually correct. They weren't brought to the mainland because they didn't want them on the mainland infecting us with the liberation philosophy and the rebellious spirit of I will not be oppressed or suppressed. So they took those Negroes to the islands and tried to break them there. The ones that they could break, they brought back to the mainland. But they didn't break them as adults. They broke them in this manner. They would get a young girl to have a baby, and they would take the baby, pass the baby on to what they call a wet nurse. The wet nurse would then be shipped over to the mainland with the baby and passed off to another wet nurse who is the property of a guy that owned a plantation, which is actually not a plantation as in it wasn't his. in the sense of it was his property. It was his right to work the land according to settling the land after a war. What they were trying to do was settle the land. That's what the whole conflict was. So you never was a slave, you was a POW. It's the same as Gitmo. George Washington was installed the exact same way as Muhammad Karzai in Afghanistan. And the country was set up on um, in two different phases. First, it was set up as a treaty agreement with the Iroquois Nation, which you see as your Constitution and your Declaration of Independence. That was when the European factions of the POWs, because the Irish were the first slaves brought over here, and a lot of people forget that they were tricked over here as indentures because the Irish had been subject to the potato famine. The potato famine was facilitated by the poisoning of the land by the guy that y'all call St. Patrick, who was the general sent to execute the priests there that was teaching the Irish and raising the Irish up so that they could ascend. And so they poisoned the land to make life difficult for the Irish and the Scots. The Scots being the descendants of the Princess Scotta of Egypt, who were being used to uplift these people and give them an opportunity to ascend. So when the St. Patrick done their dirt and they left all of those, what they did was they poisoned the land with dead bodies and waste product, all different types of waste product. And until that stuff recycled through the land, putrefy, break down, and rebuild, that's what caused the potato famine. And they flooded the land in order to flood the priests who lived, some of them in subterranean dwellings. So the Irish were brought over as indentured servants, and this is why they say Europe dumped their prisons over here. Those were POWs, prisoners of war. There was no such thing as a prison. Everything you see as prison to this day is POWs. They're all prisoners of war to this very day. Because when you look it up, we are not under a law that facilitates the punishment of the physical withholding of the body. Our law is all in paper. It's in trust and it's in economics. Because it tells you that the law, in America, law is commercial. Commercial means it's for sale. Law is commercial. Commercial means it's for sale. That's in the United States Code. You can look it up just by Googling in your phone. The law is commercial, and you will see what I'm talking about. From there, we find out that from the Irish being early colonists, the war that was taking place and the POWs that was brought up. When you know history, you can match it up. It's common everyday references. Now, you have presidents and early American colonial writers that we forget about studying in school, but they told us exactly what was taking place with this war. And they told us that who was the guilty culprits, what was they trying to do, how they was trying to steal the country. All these things is being told. But this was a dialogue, and what they call your continental congresses was actually the Iroquois nations was holding treaty agreements with the English, the French, and the Spaniards. And so, the truth being in plain sight, they never changed the name of Amur Inca. They just changed the spelling and pronunciation. It's Amur Inca. And they've been telling you it's America. And it's not under the Constitution of the United States of America. That's corporate. It's under the Confederation of the Iroquois Nation. And if they don't know the Confederation by heart, and they claim to be in a position to hold authority over you, then they're not part of that. They're part of the corporation. So you got to separate the body from the corporation. And the confused movements going on now is people that's struggling to become 5/5 realize they stuck at 4.5. They stuck at 4.5, which is going to get them drugged back down to the 3/5 compromised again. So I think I'm gonna wrap this up right here because I think I've been rambling on, and I hope y'all liked it and everything. But I'm gonna wrap this up here, and y'all can leave me any questions, inbox me y'all have any about what y'all heard, because a lot of this information is probably kind of new, but hopefully I explained it enough for y'all to connect the dots, because it's all in plain sight. It's no secret. It's all in plain sight. It's not a secret. So I want to go on to tell y'all, pay attention to when you see the media jump on somebody. And this is going to be the closing. Whether it's um, Bill Cosby, whether it's um, R. Kelly, whether it's any of them, if it's an old case, 30, 40 years old like Bill Cosby, you have to pay attention. If R. Kelly has been guilty from day one, did they just now figure that out? Or did they know all the time? Now, those are the only two questions. Because the way that they're presenting it is he's been a prolonged rapist for a very long time. Now, I ain't saying whether he's innocent or guilty. I'm bringing your attention to how they're using this to cover something else up. Whether he innocent or guilty, it's going to be determined when all of the facts finally be revealed. And that's another story. But as far as for if he was guilty 25 years ago, think about that. If he was guilty 25 years ago, if he was guilty 25 years ago and he got exonerated from everything, and all of this time he been repeatedly doing this all over again for 25 years without nobody stopping him, y'all need to think. What are they trying to get your attention away from? Why are they trying to get you to look at R. Kelly? Because for 25 years, they didn't give a damn. For 25 years, they didn't care about these women. For 25 years, that they supposed to know all this stuff was going on, they didn't care. What are they distracting you from? Bill Cosby. They said he did this stuff 35 years ago. So for 35 years, they knew this happened. For 35 years, they knew this happened. And for 35 years, they knew that he was sending hundreds of black children to college, trade school, that he was paying massive amounts of money to support many, many black charities. Not until he tried to buy NBC did he ever have an issue with them people. I'm not saying whether he innocent or guilty. I'm saying think, people. I'm saying that if he was doing this for 35 years, he drugging and raping. This is a high-profile figure. A high profile. He walks around with entourage. Y'all got to remember this about these men. They walks around with entourage. There's groups of people that's with them everywhere they go. So they let Bill Cosby run rampant for 50 years, uninterrupted about anything sexual for 50 years. 50 years they saying he's been raping these women and drugging them. I don't know. I wasn't there. But I know these people will not let us do something of that magnitude for that period of time unanswered unless they can use it to their own advantage. That's the same with R. Kelly. I'm not saying whether he's innocent or guilty. I'm saying that if he's been guilty for 25 years. Now notice all of these things are what you call back to back to back. All of them. If you want to know why Michael Jackson is dead, and you want to know why they accused him of child molestation, I'm going to tell you Go back to a black or white video. I think it was your Yo MTV Awards in 90. It was somewhere between 80, no, between 91 and 93. At the end of the video, the fan was blowing on him in the T pose. In his shirt, he had a white shirt, it was blowing the wind, and then about a whole stage full of kids ran out and rushed Mike. Now, I'm going to show you how short our memories are with this one, too. So, they gave him rave reviews on the performance at first. 2 days later, the reports changed. Mike thought he was the Christ, and he needed to be stopped because nobody of his status should try to influence the world into thinking they're the Christ. We forget about this is what happened with Mike. Now, less than 2 years later, he's charged with the first sex case. Less than 2 years later. Now, where's the parallel? The document is the government document called COINTELPRO Mission Statement. It's not a secret and it's easy to find. COINTELPRO, Counterintelligence Program, Mission Statement, where it clearly states that they would stop the rise of any potential messiah who would incite the masses. Mike incited the hell out of the masses. So when he did the T-pose and they started saying, hey, he might be the Christ, he got to go. He was marked from that day forward. People that knew me when he was found not guilty of the last farce, I said they gonna give him he got less than 5 years. They're gonna kill him because the people not believing the bush. They're not falling for it. Mike being the molester. They're not believing it. They have not produced any credible evidence to date of Mike ever molesting anybody. But it's easy for the public to fall for it because he's such a high-profile eccentric, a savant. And because he's such a high-profile savant, his oddities make it easy to accuse him of something. But they cannot produce any tangible evidence of any sort. Now, y'all got to remember, one of the things that got him exonerated on the case was the boy described his genitalia. And they took pictures of Mike, and the description the boy gave did not match. That's how he beat the case. We forget that. We forget that a lot of the follow-up after the trial found a lot of that stuff to be fluff with no substance. But people get so caught up on the theme of the story and the sensationalism, but they're telling you in plain sight what they're doing to this man, why they doing it, and you have to either be perceptive enough to help this man be safe and give you the best quality Michael Jackson he can give you, or you can jump on the bandwagon and throw up your condemn the rapist sign with no evidence. Now, have you ever been falsely accused? And if you have, how did you feel? Now, in the case of somebody like Michael Jackson, when you realize how you felt, turn it up about 50,000. Because the magnitude of people who honored this man and he wanted to hold their reverence, the magnitude of effect that would have on somebody like that, they was trying to make him commit suicide. The real story of Michael Jackson is, once they realized he thought he was the Christ, they realized after that point, he tricked them out of Sony. He really got to go. He tricked them out of Sony. He got 52% controlling interest. He can tell Jimmy Iovine, Ted Fields, and all them to kiss his ass, and Clive Davis, all of those dirty record execs, those blood worshippers, Babylonian money magic magicians. He could tell them to kiss his butt. He got the control. Mike has to go. So I don't care if what your ethnicity is. Right is right and wrong is wrong. We sit here accusing this man with no evidence. No evidence. They tried to say the man was molesting Macaulay Culkin and hurt Macaulay Culkin's feelings. Why would you say my homeboy did that? That's just wrong. We forget those things. They tried to say he molested Gary Coleman. And Gary Coleman was like, what? What's the other little boy? They call him Webster. Webster, he was blue black. He couldn't believe they said that about Mike. And we wiped that out the way in order to accept the gossip aspect. And that's where we wrong at. Do the research, gather the evidence, and look in their FBI files. If you want to know what's going on the West Coast with our entertainers, stop looking at this Illuminati distraction shit. Pull some FBI files. When you pull out FBI files, every entertainer that you done found mysteriously dead in the last 50 years got the same name pop up in all their FBI files as extortioners, intimidators, and people who offer their services for protection against unsavory threats. That's extortion. But they use it just as that part because they can't say they extorting them because they got to also prove that they threatening them. But they can protect them from the threat. And so when you look back over all these artists' career and you match their FBI files up and one group of people pop up, Babylonian money magicians, we should start to ask some questions and we should start trying to help people live a healthy life free from all of that sorcery. We're going to close you out with Hollywood. The word Hollywood means holy wood. It's built on the West Coast because of the redwood forest. The red being the blood of the Christ, the wood being the cross. So they named it Hollywood. But it also is the holy wood or the hallowed wood or the wormwood in which the resurrections takes place in the West. Because they use this to make wands, a magic wand, to cast spells. So they do a casting call, and then they do a reading. A reading is a determination if you are proper for the casting. What are they casting? Hollywood with this spell. Pay attention. They tell it to you in plain sight. And California is Kali and Narnia. Look them up. California is Kali and Narnia. Kali is the goddess of the thugs. The Thuggee is what they call them in India. They were commissioned as Robin Hood to keep the balance of wealth. They was commissioned to rob the rich, and feed the poor. That was through the goddess Kali, the dark mother, who we talked about earlier, is Diana, the god killer, who was protector of the earth. They call Kal-El, who they undermined as Helen and call her Superman in pop culture. But now they have to tell you the truth that she's really the Supergirl, and her name is really Kali, because she about to come back as the mother Isis, and we about to be fixing this real soon. So I ain't made up my mind the next subject, so I'll take any suggestions anybody have, and I'm going to wrap this up here. I hope y'all enjoyed. Thanks for listening to me, and I hope I can get to help y'all to grow and evolve into this new reality that we moving in. Y'all, peace and good fortune.